The stone tent. The winter of 1888 did not knock on the door of the Dakota Territory. It came like a verdict. Alma Lindqvist stood alone in her cabin, watching frost creep across the wooden walls like a living thing. Her husband had been buried the previous spring, and with him went the last illusion of safety. What remained were 2 small children, a broken fireplace, and 2 cords of firewood, enough to warm a home for a month, not a season that could kill. Everyone knew it. Neighbors shook their heads when they passed her land. She won't last the winter, they said. Not with children, not with so little wood. Some urged her to flee. Others had already packed their wagons. But Alma stayed. Then she began to do something no one had ever seen. Day after day, she dragged heavy fieldstones into her cabin, stones torn from frozen earth, stones that split her palms and bruised her knees. She stacked them slowly, deliberately, building walls inside her home. Not a hearth, not a chimney, a room within a room. People laughed. They whispered that grief had broken her mind. They called it a tomb. Alma never answered. She worked in silence, measuring space with a mother's instinct rather than a ruler. She built thick walls, tight corners, a low ceiling. When the last stone was set, she stood back and looked at it, not with pride, but with resolve. This is where we will live, she told her children. On January 12, 1888, the sky betrayed the plains. In 6 hours, the temperature fell 60 degrees. The wind turned savage. Snow blinded travelers within steps of their doors. Horses froze where they stood. Across the northern plains, 235 people died, some found curled in the snow, others reaching for shelter they never reached. That night, Alma lit a small fire inside the stone enclosure. The flames were modest. They had to be. Wood was precious. But the stones drank in the heat, holding it deep within their frozen bones. When the fire burned low, the walls stayed warm. When it died, the warmth remained, radiating back into the narrow space like a beating heart. Outside, death screamed in the wind. Inside the stone tent, 2 children slept. Alma did not. She listened to the storm claw at the cabin, felt the cold pressing against the outer walls, and trusted the stones she had placed one by one with bleeding hands. She fed the fire sparingly. She counted the hours. She waited. She waited. The night stretched endlessly, each hour heavy with the sound of the wind battering the cabin like a living beast. Ice formed on the outer walls, sealing the world beyond into silence and white. The fire had long since faded to embers, but the stones still breathed warmth, slow and steady, as if remembering the flames that had touched them. Alma pressed her back against the wall and felt it, still warm. Not hot, not comforting, but enough. Enough to keep blood moving through small fingers. Enough to keep breath from turning to frost inside fragile lungs. At times, fear crept in like the cold itself. What if the stones failed? What if morning never came? She closed her eyes and rested her hand on each child's chest, counting the rise and fall, anchoring herself to the quiet proof of life. She did not pray for rescue. She prayed for endurance. Dawn arrived without color. The storm passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural. When Alma finally rose, her legs stiff and aching, she fed the fire one last careful piece of wood. The stones accepted it gratefully, glowing faintly in the dim light. She waited again, this time for the sun. When it finally broke across the plains, it revealed a frozen graveyard. Wagons stood abandoned in drifts. Doors lay half open, their owners never having made it back inside. Smoke rose from almost no chimneys at all. But from Alma Lindqvist's cabin, it rose steadily. Neighbors came slowly, hesitant, as if approaching something sacred, or impossible. They knocked once, then again. When the door opened, they did not speak. They simply stared. The children were alive, pale, tired, but alive. Alma stood behind them, her face lined with exhaustion, her hands raw and cracked, but her eyes clear. Someone stepped inside the cabin and reached out, touching the stone wall. It was still warm. No one laughed anymore. No one spoke of tombs or madness. They stood there in silence, understanding that what had saved this family was not luck, nor miracle, but thought, patience, and a mother who refused to surrender. In the years that followed, the story spread across the plains. People spoke of the winter that killed hundreds, and of the widow who outlasted it. Some tried to copy her design. Others simply remembered, but Alma never called it genius. When asked why she built the stone tent, she answered simply, "I didn't try to beat the cold. I only tried to give my children a place where it couldn't reach them all at once." And so the stone enclosure remained, not as a monument, but as a lesson written in rock. That survival is not always loud. That courage is often quiet. And that sometimes, the strongest walls are built not with strength, but with love, laid stone by stone. Years later, when the children were grown and the cabin stood weathered beneath endless skies, travelers still stopped to see the place where winter had been held at bay. The stones were cold now, ordinary once more, but those who touched them swore they could feel something lingering, an echo of warmth, of care pressed into every crevice. Alma never left the land. She planted again. She rebuilt what the storm had tried to erase. And when the plains whispered of that terrible winter, her name was spoken softly, with respect. Not because she had defied nature, but because, when the world turned cruel, she chose to endure. And in doing so, she taught the plains a quiet truth. That love can be shelter. That patience can be power. And that even in the deadliest cold, a determined heart can keep others alive.